Welcome to the Mullin It Over podcast with Reverend Jack Mullins and Austin Covey. How's it going, everybody? And welcome to another edition of Mullin It Over, Christmas special, I guess we'll call it.
Yeah.
Since it's about that time of year, with myself, Austin Covey, and
Reverend Jack Mullins.
And so you can tell our backdrop is different than it has been, but it's getting on about Christmas time. We thought we'd show off our Christmas tree.
And this is part two of our pre-Christmas special, thanks to our camera.
Our other camera overheated, and we had to swap cameras while it cools down. So these may end up as one video or two separate videos or both. Not sure yet, but this is a different camera if it looks a little weird.
And where we left off previously was question to Austin. What questions might you have regarding our Christmas traditions, either scripturally or...
That's a good question.
Culturally. Thank you. I get one every once in a while.
Should we go for the famous one of the drummer boy? There's zero scriptural evidence there was a drummer boy. As far as I know. Also, there's probably zero practical evidence because I don't have kids. You do, but I would assume somebody walking in with a drum right after you gave birth would really not go well with.
Yeah, that's not a good look. Yeah, the whole concept of the story. But it's like lots of what we consider quote-unquote tradition is simply because at some point it worked its way probably into a Christmas play at some point in time, and they were trying to how do you announce the coming of something? You use pipes and drums and all of this, and it was a manger, so there had to be cows and sheep and donkeys and all of that. Yeah, well, none of that is according to Scripture, but it has become a part of tradition.
When something about the song Silent Night and Little Drummer Boy seemed a bit juxtaposed.
Absolutely.
You cannot have both.
And you mentioned just how well would a little kid banging on a drum be received by a mother who just gave birth.
Yeah.
He would have been out with the shepherds.
I was going to say he might have caught his first butt whooping right there.
But you know, the point is a lot of our traditions, even the timing of our celebration, because as the movement of the church moved north into Europe and north from there, it became associated with the winter festivals and all of the lights, the candles on Christmas acknowledge the longest night, and we're celebrating the return of the sun, the return of light, the rebirth of spring.
Because the census, as far as we know, would not have been conducted at this time of year, right? That would have been...
Correct.
Yeah.
Best guess, and again, it's largely a guess, would have been sometime in the spring, first, I don't know, April, May, something like that. They guessed. No one's sure. Sometime earlier in the year for sure.
Right, but not
December 25th.
Right. So
it's kind of like, when were you born? I don't know. Pick a date.
Yeah.
My son-in-law's father had a birth date like that. He was Vietnamese. His mother was trying to keep him out of the Vietnamese army as long as possible, hoping, well, maybe the war will pass him by, so I'm going to declare his date of birth 2 years earlier. Ultimately, didn't work. And,
good try.
Hey, you got to give her A for effort.
There you go. Let's see, what other Christmas traditions are you... For some reason, I'm drawing a blank on them.
Well, you know, you look at wreaths, evergreens, trees.
Christmas tree.
All of it is cultural assimilation.
Yeah, I was going to say a lot of it is pagan cultural assimilation, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't remember. What is the deal with the Chrismons? Where did they come from?
They are a visual representation and reminder of some of the key elements of Christian tradition. They all stand for something and
important iconography.
Yeah, and serves as an educational tool.
I'm going to try to get this one off without breaking anything. It strikes me as being somewhat ironic that we have a cross chrismon at the birth.
Yeah. Yeah, the symbol of the crucifixion.
Right, putting the cart ahead of the horse there, aren't we?
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't remember.
But we, and yet that's kind of the condition of our faith, in that we already know the end of the story.
Yes.
So we know that the nativity is tied to the resurrection, to the crucifixion. We know that. And, for us, it's really not incongruent to tie the two together, because it's all part of the same narrative.
And we've been in it long enough now that we understand this part, like you said, with that. We are not living the Mary Joseph life, right, where it's we're not living it in real time. We're seeing the whole thing as a
Now, where in my opinion, is something of a negative is when you have new believers who are coming in, and they are new to the story, and they don't necessarily automatically put the whole thing together, because they're still learning it piece by piece, and sometimes learning it backwards, in that they are learning it from resurrection toward the front
to the birth. Yeah. Well, that's true, because most of the time we spend discussing the resurrection.
Yeah.
I mean, understandably so. We spend more time throughout the year talking about the resurrection than we do about the birth.
Right. Yeah. So. Well, once you get on the other side of Epiphany, you're already into, even chronologically on the calendar, in the life of the church, you get past Epiphany, in 6 weeks you're going into Lent.
Right. Happens quickly.
It happens from my perspective, active within the leadership of the church, sometimes far too quickly. You haven't physically, emotionally, or mentally recovered from Advent and Christmas before you're already thinking about Lent and Easter.
Yeah, that's true.
Of course, then you have nearly 6 months of
very slow time.
Kingdom time, we refer to it.
Relatively speaking.
Yeah. Yes. Some church calendars refer to it as ordinary time. And I had a good friend who I referred to it that way, and she got in my face and said, "There's nothing ordinary about God's time." And I said, "Hey, I didn't coin the term. I just read the paper.
Don't shoot the messenger."
Don't shoot the messenger. I agree, but
you could call it green time.
Green time. She said, "Well, the term is kingdom time." Fine, I won't make that mistake again with you in the congregation.
Whatever makes you happy.
That's right.
If you wonder why I say green time, it's because you can see the lights behind the tree. There are lights that correspond with different times of the year in the church calendar, colors that correspond. And right now, purple would be the color. During normal time, it is green. And
then purple for Lent, and then white for Eastertide.
And red for Pentecost.
Yeah. And Pentecost is kind of the lead-in to the 578 weeks of Kingdom time. It just seems that long.
Forever.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But, and we look at the stories and wonder why they speak to us or don't speak to us. And one thing I was looking at today was to whom was the Gospel of Matthew targeted? And that was typically a Jewish audience. And so it would have been important for Matthew to set the story with a Jewish slant, and I think that's why Matthew begins with an interminably long genealogy of how
so-and-so begat
the family
so-and-so.
of Jesus connected historically back to ancient times.
Right.
Because for the Jews, that was of utmost importance. Luke, on the other hand, had a much more Gentile kind of audience. The comment that I read and connected with was written to be read aloud to groups of Jesus followers gathered in houses to share the Lord's Supper. And it seems to assume an educated Greek-speaking audience. So a Gentile worldview.
Educated Gentile
Educated Gentile worldview.
Why do you think the other two Gospels don't even really touch the story?
My opinion is, and I really don't have anything that I can point to validate it. Mark may just have never been in a position to have tied on to the stories, to have grown up within the telling of those stories, been a part of the myths.
Mark is the oldest gospel, correct?
Mark is reputed to be the oldest gospel, yeah.
I wondered if it just, to them, the sort of like you said, the fact that Jesus was born is the important part. The rest of it is kind of, if they were just like, he was born, that's what matters, keep it moving,
Yeah.
Keep it moving.
And it may not have been so much the fact that he was born, but the fact of who he was when they encountered him.
Right.
How he got from point A, the nativity, to their encounter was maybe secondary to the person whom they encountered when they did.
They just knew he had to have been born to get here. So
yeah.
So we know he was born, and then we pick it up where makes sense.
And but so much of Luke and Matthew is actually based upon Mark material. I forget, over 100, I think I read 122 verses of Mark are referred to in Luke. So there's a tremendous amount of that material that is in both of those other two Gospels.
Heavy citing of the source material.
Heavy citing. That's why they're called synoptic Gospels. And John's just kind of an outlier.
I was going to say John's the flyer.
He does his own thing.
I don't know. You got anything else you want
to? One thing, I think it is sad when I hear of families that during the celebration of Christmas find themselves torn apart by old hurts and angers and sadness. And, we recognize that from a mental health perspective, Christmas, which is presented as a time of joy and celebration, is also a time of sorrow and sadness and depression for a lot of people, because it triggers so much emotional stuff. And many churches have services that focus on those aspects of the human condition.
The church I grew up in has one. I think it was last Friday, maybe. They call it Blue Christmas.
Yeah.
And that's there.
And I've, one of the negative aspects of the ministry is you often don't get to participate in some of these services because you're always in a position of having to lead and direct and create and organize and facilitate. But the feedback I continue to get from folks is that they were very helpful. They really helped me get a handle on why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling in this season.
That makes sense. When I heard a new one the other day, I heard of somebody doing a Christmas Day service. Have you ever heard of a Christmas Day service?
What do you mean by?
Like they were having I didn't get a lot of details, but they said, we're having worship at 10 o'clock on Christmas morning.
Oh, yeah.
I thought that was interesting. I've never known anybody to do a Christmas Day service.
Never known a Catholic?
No, I think these were Lutheran, but Catholic light.
Yeah.
I'm kidding. Don't get mad at me.
But it is a celebration of Christmas Mass.
Okay.
within that context. But, lots of Protestant churches, I think, embrace the value of that. And, yeah.
We don't really do that. I don't know. I guess I've been in the Disciples Church too long. I don't know these things. I've never been to Disciples Church.
Selfishly, I would prefer not to, because I would want to spend that time with my family, my quote-unquote real family. Mm-hmm. But for churches with clergy for whom the church is their family, it kind of makes sense. Yeah. You can hold a mass for whomever may come and celebrate and benefit from it.
Well, a minute ago when you made the comment about having to plan the service, it made me think of that, because I was like, man, that's 4 services in a Sunday to Sunday gap, a 1 week gap. You're doing, your Sunday service, your Christmas Eve service, your Christmas Day service, and then the next Sunday service. That's a lot of...
Yeah, and if you're in a church that or a congregation that is large enough for multiple services, it just magnifies.
Yeah, because usually if you're doing more than one Christmas Eve service, they're not the same.
Right.
So a lot of places you'll have your more kid-oriented service earlier, and then your more, I won't say adult, but your candlelight service later. So it's not like you can necessarily use the same template and turn it over. They may be very different.
And up until the last few years, I almost always did 2 services on Christmas Eve. Mm-hmm. And by the end of the second one, I was just spent. I mean, I had nothing left to give.
You didn't want to turn around and do it again at 10 o'clock next morning?
No, no. Churches, I think, that do this largely have multiple staff, and they can assign the Christmas Day service to another one of the clergy and on a rotating basis, and not burn everybody out completely.
Yeah.
We're going to burn out anyway.
You're going to need a break afterwards.
You got to have a break. And a long, long time ago, I declared that, and I did it for my family, that no longer would I preach on the Sunday after Christmas, that the period from end of Christmas Eve service until the first Sunday of the new year, I'm done. That's family time. That's my time. And managed to convince all of them that's not even vacation time. This is time I have to recharge and regenerate.
Sort of sabbatical time in a sense, yeah.
In a way.
Like just mini sabbatical.
Mini sabbatical. But it was important, and they have all understood and maybe perceived it as something of a non-negotiable, and either didn't care enough to argue the point. Okay, go away. Let us enjoy ourselves.
Well, in a more modern setting, I think you could say it's really mental health time. And that's become a more acceptable thing in more recent years. So
well, and clergy have recently, when I say recently, I'm going to say within the last 25 years, been identified as a population that experiences a tremendous amount of fatigue and depression, professional burnout.
Well, my understanding is the attrition rate is very high.
The attrition rate is high. Because I can think back to, over the course of my career, more than merely a handful of people who at some point or the other bailed out and went to do something else. Usually because they never learned how to manage or negotiate the mental abuse of congregations or congregants. Because people in congregations can be brutal to clergy and their families.
They can be brutal to everybody.
Absolutely.
But I think clergy are in a unique place. I speak as not being a person of clergy, are in a unique place to be sort of. It's like the call center job that I used to have. I would say, I may talk to 100 people in a day. Well, each one of those 100 people think their problem is the biggest problem.
Yeah.
But they're just the 53rd person I've talked to today with the same problem.
Yeah.
So it's like for the clergy, it's not just that maybe one person can be a jerk. It's that you have a congregation of 100 people or more, and at any given time, everybody has a bad day, and they all want to come talk to you on their bad day.
Yeah.
So you experience 100 different people's bad days all the time.
Well, and it's not so much, from my perspective, not so much that, because I would tell people all the time, you can come in my office and yell to me about what's bothering you anytime you want to. Just don't come in my office and yell at me.
Yeah. Well, some people don't understand how to differentiate those two things.
Yeah. And but that's where our skill needs to kind of help keep them on track. Now, I did finally learn that you can push back.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of clergy, we're targets because we don't know how to stand up in the face of an irate congregant, especially one that is unreasonable.
Mm-hmm.
If someone's got a legitimate and reasonable issue, come in. We can talk about that, and I can walk you through your anger, your frustration. We can come out on the other side. But if you're being purely unreasonable about something that is not in my control or anyone else's, we have to learn that it's okay to push back. We don't have to push back in kind,
right?
But we can push back, although
having boundaries.
You can learn in any role, teacher, educator, minister, whomever, to identify the personality types and the ones who are going to persistently be a problem. I think the cultural term now is the Karens.
Yeah, I feel bad for people named Karen, so I try not to use that term.
I understand.
But I think, too, and I don't know if this is by personality or by training or trait. I think, again, from the outside looking in, a lot of clergy tend to be more of the people pleaser type or service. Maybe service oriented is a better term than people pleaser. And it seems like a lot of them feel like setting boundaries is not doing service, because telling somebody you can't help them or that they need to, take a long walk off a short cliff is not service oriented. That's my term, not theirs. Whereas I guess maybe if you come from more of a businessy background, you're less service oriented and you don't mind telling people to take a hike when their problem's not your problem. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think sometimes clergy aren't maybe as enabled, maybe through training or reassurance, that they can tell people to shove off sometimes, and that's okay. Politely, but I mean,
an encounter that I've had at multiple congregations, and it's kind of silly the way it all started. Back in the early half of the 20th century, it became popularized to put American flags in the chancel to show, yay, us. Well, there came a point where...
This was post-World War II, right?
During and post.
Yeah, okay.
And during the 50s, it was to demonstrate we're not communists.
Right.
And because we have God on our side. The theology of that whole concept being on the board. But as time progressed, many churches became uncomfortable with that because the theology of it was not good. I had an encounter at a church served relatively recently over that issue. The worship chair, before I arrived at that church, found the whole notion of flags in the chancel very disturbing. So as worship chair, he moved them out.
Right.
And there were just a handful of people who took strong issue with that. My compromise will bring them in. We will not put them on the chancel. And they actually ended up between a couple of two artificial ficus trees.
Put them in the corner.
In a corner in the room, and that wasn't satisfactory. So we moved them from the trees. But I had one member who came to me and really got in my face about they belong in the chancel, and I'd had it. I'm done with this conversation, and I very reasonably politely, but very directly told the individual, no, they do not belong in the chancel because you cannot post a flag behind any other significant object. And in the chancel of God, you cannot put anything in front of the communion table.
Right.
They cannot go up there. You want a place for them? Put them right here, which was in the narthex as you were entering the sanctuary or leaving the sanctuary. This is a buffer area between the secular world and the sanctuary of God. This is where it belongs. You can acknowledge it as you leave the secular and greet it as you return.
Well, as you said, it's kind of a catch-22 because one can't, both items are in a situation where one can't be in front of the other or can't be behind the other. So you can have to take your pick.
Read somewhere someone was engaging in this conversation from a very, that button had been pushed one or too many times.
They were ramped up.
And their comparison was it's you get a flag in the chancel. It's like certain communicable diseases. Once you catch it, you can't get rid of it.
Well, I do think it's, I don't know that I'd put it that way, but I do think you have to be careful of what you put up there in the sense that things can start to become idolized very quickly.
They become holy real quick.
And that is, I think, a concern. Well, we've talked before on a different episode about even parts of the chancel furniture or what have you becoming idolized real quick. So it can be, anytime you start putting stuff front and center, it can, you got to make sure that the symbolism doesn't become, the symbol doesn't become the thing you're worshiping, I guess.
Yeah. Now, church I served had a beautiful, large, handmade communion table. It was a semicircle. Sucker weighed probably 300 pounds. It was not easily movable, and they were of the opinion it cannot be moved. We may not move it. We shall not move it. Why? It's too heavy. It requires too many people. Okay. Have you heard of wheels? Well, you can't put wheels on it. Yeah, don't tell me what I can't do. And one night,
you don't want me to put wheels on it. That's different than I can't put wheels on it.
And I looked at it, got a friend to help me tip it over. We installed some wheels coasters on the bottom of it, lifted it up just enough where it did not sink into the carpet, and suddenly one person could move it.
Right.
And how'd you do that? I put wheels on it.
Just tell them that you prayed over it and now
prayed over it and it rose.
There you go.
Yeah. They were disciples. They knew better than that.
It was worth a try.
It was worth a try.
But, a minute ago when we were talking about sort of depression and burnout in clergy, and then before that even we were talking about depression and sort of this time of year and Christmas time. And I've sort of come to the hypothesis that I'd be interested to have Maddie back on and ask her. And I've posited this to a couple people recently, and based on how they react, I think maybe there's some truth to it. I think a lot of depression, particularly around this time of year, comes from misplaced expectations. People sort of form these, and I don't think Hollywood has helped this, right? Like Hollywood presents this very idealized image of Christmas or whatever, and people get this real idealized image in their mind of what it's going to look like, and then when it doesn't look like that, they're
Hallmark Christmas stories. Yeah.
But I think that happens with young clergy too. During my one semester of seminary, right, for all that was worth, there was a lot of idealization, or some real strong idealism of what was going to happen, and I think maybe expectations and reality don't always coincide when the rubber meets the road, and then maybe that's a cause for.
I think so. I've noticed people And I think one reason why you see so many churches who have large congregations, but you still have only a small number of people actively engaged in the ongoing ministry and programming and implementation of the church, is when you get that close, it's not that you become disillusioned, but you see the pragmatic, factual activity of what it takes to make it work.
You look behind the curtain.
You look behind the curtain. Suddenly, Oz is exposed.
Yeah. It functions, and I got in trouble at the last church for using business terminology in church and making too many comparisons. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it functions just like a lot of other businesses, or at least a lot of other nonprofits.
Yeah.
There is a business and administrative side to it that's not, what is the word? I would say not sunshine and rainbows, but maybe not the idealized version of how church works that people want it to be.
Right. Well, and the elements of social psychology and sociology, all of these, in my opinion, come into play. Example is, how do you determine the seating capacity of a room? And not just how many chairs can you put in there, but how many people can you reasonably expect to occupy that space on a week-to-week, long-term basis.
I think that's key, is consistent basis, too. I think that week-to-week, long-term basis is kind of... Because you can cram a lot of people in there for Christmas and Easter. That doesn't mean that's sustainable.
No,
the rest
because
of the time.
We psychologically cannot do that all the time.
Right.
It will level out. Church I served in Garland, just up the road, was a Korean Presbyterian church. And I went up to visit with one of their ministers. He was Anglo, grew up in Korea. And showed me the sanctuary. And one thing I've already done, especially in larger sanctuaries, is try to get a feel for the seating capacity. So I looked at the length of the pews, how many there were. I said, man, this is nice. It's seat, 300, 350? He said, no, 500. Where do you put 500 people? He said, my congregation are Korean. Their sense of personal space is much different than ours.
That makes sense.
And physiologically, they tend to be smaller. Just the pragmatic reality of my congregants makes this acceptable for a larger number of people. But then again, same rule of human interaction. No one wants to stay in a compressed state all the time. We need to be able to relax our personal space.
Got to have some breathing room.
And that's why for Anglo congregations, I think the rule of thumb is roughly 60% of capacity on normal routine.
That's sustainable?
That's sustainable.
That makes sense.
So don't think if you're having 50 people in church, don't think that you're going to be able to push them all into a 100-seat congregation or sanctuary, because you're approaching the normal threshold. You've got to expand.
Right.
Well, we can't fill up what we've got. We certainly won't be able to fill that up. No, but you can increase up to a certain limit of that threshold. But no, you'll never fill it.
Right. Not on a permanent
Not every
basis.
Sunday.
Yeah.
Now, Christmas and Easter, you may fill it.
Everybody's okay being uncomfortable for a short.
Everybody's
for 2
willing
weeks a year.
to be shoulder to shoulder on Christmas Eve
Yeah.
and Christmas and Easter. But don't ask me to do it the Sunday after Christmas or the Sunday after Easter.
Or the middle of August or whatever
Middle
else.
of August, ain't no way. Too hot.
I was going to say some of that might have scaled back to the pre-air conditioning days when nobody was trying to sit that close anyway.
Well, that could be. That could be. Well, my friend, I've got some activities coming up shortly, so I'm going to bring us to a close, whether you were ready or not.
Hey, I've got lunch coming up, so I'm about to go find some food.
That sounds like
it's 4:45 in the afternoon. So
it's almost time for supper.
Hey, there you go.
So I want to thank everyone for joining with us today. It's always entertaining for me to sit down and shoot the breeze with my buddy Austin, good old East Texas boy. And
hope we don't bore y'all too much.
But thanks for looking in, dropping in, and we hope to see you again next time around. God bless and Merry Christmas. Have a good one, and I know it will be after the fact. I hope you had a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. God bless you. Thank you for joining us today for this episode of Mulling It Over. I hope that you found something meaningful and beneficial to take with you.
If you have any questions or topics you would like to hear us discuss, you can either put them down in the video comments or you can email them to us at office@irvingnorthcc.org.
As always, we want to invite you to join us for worship every Sunday morning, 11 o'clock a.m. at Irving North Christian Church, 2602 Texas Drive, Irving, Texas. May God bless.